Yeah. Thank you for joining us and also for your patience. We are Raffaella and Tim, and we are delightful uh, to join us in our first code review inside Django. And we have different, for who doesn't know, we have different experience, but we start from mm, to learning now about Django core, and we would like to share our experience and what are we going to learn during our path. And our primary goal is to share uh, also our experience and the fact that everyone can review a ticket and a PR in Django.
Yes. And so how this session is going to work, right now, actually, I'm going to unmute folks. Don't feel obligated to actually unmute, but all right. You can all unmute yourselves again. Didn't have the security settings properly tuned, apparently. But lesson learned. So yeah, what the Raphael and I picked out a couple of PRs. We prioritized them. The one we settled on is ticket 25705. And we have this issue here. And so we have this little one-page document that explains the PR for everyone, or the ticket, a bit about the problem, and then so we're gonna suggest everyone reads this. We'll take some time to read this, to read the PR, read the code, and then we'll come back and kind of just start our discussion. And Rafael and I are going to go through it and look at the code, look at the comments on it, see what we think, where our understanding is, where the discussion on the PR went, and if there's anything that we feel like the community should consider or potentially change, we'll leave comments. And if everything looks amazing and Alex did a fantastic job, we'll let him know.
How we choose the PR? Um, we try to search for something, some topic, some familiar topic, but mm, we would like to also evaluate some PR that is more that we think is gonna be interesting for explain for an online code review. So there's lots of chance we would like to pick something that we could be interesting to sharing.
Yes. And so why are we choosing to do this online when we could just do the code reviews ourselves? The thought was that it might help others see what the process is like and try to make it a little bit more accessible, especially considering Rafael and I are not experts with Django or the Django's code base, um, that this might prove to others, hey, you can, like, if you're looking for something to do, this is a possibility.
But today we are just going to choose the PR. It's just chosen. But if you want to suggest a PR, please suggest everything you can think it's suitable for this for our code review, and we take that in consideration. So we. mm, please take your time to suggest something if you think it's gonna be suitable.
Oh, so on the left here, none of this stuff's really super easy to retype, but if you go to the Djangonaut space/space reviewers page, there at the bottom, there's a link to submit that form. Um, yeah, I'm going to try to keep this panel on the left up constantly for people if you need notes or to catch back up. But yeah, lastly, we are operating under the Djangonaut Space Code of Conduct. There's a link to it here. If you go to the Djangonaut Space program channel or repository, you can find a link to the Code of Conduct. All right, cool. So with that, um, so the issue we're looking at is ticket 25705, which is from Dimitri. I think this is pretty old. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is that I might have suggested to Alex that this should be an easy thing to change, and then he spent several months working on it and caused him a bunch of strife and Carlton a bunch of strife. And so I felt like we needed to pay him back a little bit, like join in that. Um, and so primarily as I understood it, when you print out a query from a query set, it tries to print out the SQL, but that SQL can't be copy and pasted into a database shell immediately. So for example, if you have this query where you're trying to find users based on the date joined, that query, when it gets printed out, just has the date as text. And with the database, you would actually need to wrap that in quotes to actually make it turn into a value. This is called, I believe it's called string interpolation. This issue actually, like the original reporter wanted to be able to do this of take a model, get the string of the query, and then plug that back into a raw call, and then be able to get a query set back. This is not where this PR turned out to be. Like the direction it ended up going is to basically be being able to view the queries that are being executed and being able to copy and paste those into a shell, sorry, a database shell. And so like for me specifically, like I would use this to then plug it into explain, analyze somewhere else, and not have to do any adjusting on stuff. But the discussion on the issue, which was pretty long, just quick scroll through it. It kind of varies into a couple different topics. So what we tried to do is, yeah, summarize it down into where the PR ended up and then follow that thread all the way back to the beginning. And so there was a different discussion that we identified here in the other topics area of the SQL with params, like another ticket got opened up because of this ticket, but we're ignoring all of that discussion. Um, so Alex identified that we can't only PostgreSQL and MySQL have a migrify function, which allows you to generate a SQL query effectively, but Oracle and SQLite don't. So you'd have to do that manually, and that's probably a security concern. And then also, Alex then determined like the migrify function wouldn't be great for this. So that wasn't even an option in the first place. And so they ended up landing on the idea of adding a last query or an executed query property to the query set. There, Simon agreed to it. Alex was on board with it, and Alex created a draft PR that went through a couple of reviews, and now it's to the point where it is pretty close to production ready. And so we're going to take a look at it. Yeah. So if everyone had, let me get this PR chat. Alex says that he did not work on it that many months, but he was just procrastinating working on it. Maybe, but I still feel like the pain part was true. Yeah, so I think right now let's take 10 minutes to everyone can just kind of read through the PR, look at the code, um, try to get an understanding of like what is it doing. Might also be worth to look at the ticket. Not super important for everyone else to grok it. This is mainly for Raphael and I. One of us may not have looked at the PR yet and is coming into this fresh. I need a little time to get familiar with it. So I wanted a little notes thing here so I can keep track of my thoughts.
Do you usually prefer to write on the paper or take some notes on the on Notepad or something or other apps?
Yeah. I I don't know. I like text editor. It's quick, easy.
I think I'm going to be the old one.
How are you doing, Raffaella?
I think respect of what Alex said before, I think there's a lot of work on this PR because I think there's a lot of different suggestion made before this PR, a different kind of approach that have been made.
Yeah, agreed. I was looking through it and looking at the tests, the last one, um, it proves that if you have a prefetch which does a second query, like so, if you evaluate a query set that has a prefetch related, it does two queries, and it'll only return, last query is only going to return the main model that you're selecting, not the prefetched one, or not the prefetched query. And I would wonder, do we want to include the prefetches as well? Because if we, yeah, it makes sense why it's last query, but at the same time, if you're running a query set and using the ORM, I think there's a reasonable understand, like you would want to know what all happened there. Um, does that make sense?
Mm. So you think that the query set need to be evaluated first?
I'm saying I think I would wonder how people would feel about changing last query here to last queries, and then somehow if you would access it here, so there's a query set with prefetch, so it has a prefetch on the related model, and then when you evaluate it, it's doing two queries. If
Ah,
you
okay.
access, yeah, the executed query for that query set, because it actually ran two queries to the data, if there was two queries that hit the database, should you not be aware of both of those? Is it actually helpful to hide the second one? Or however many there actually are, because you can have as many prefetches as you want.
Do you think it's better to have two two query so we can change um, the last query and uh, use this last queries to have two queries?
Yeah, it would be a variable number of queries, but I think that it's going to be a challenge. It would be a challenge to figure that out because the way we're how right now we're just looking at to get the last query, it's
Mm.
grabbing the last one. There's no way to know how many queries were generated from which query set. We're just kind of assuming that there's only going to be that they're going to happen in order. Well, I think maybe I could be wrong on how queries works. So query, so this is actually, let's go ahead and pull this code. I don't think I actually did that yet. Um, all right, so Alex said, I can see logging every
Yeah.
query set. Um, I can see the logging every query set. Every query the query set makes being a possibility. Some notes he'd have are if the query set is evaluated multiple times, does each time get added to the list? It's a good question. The implementation gets complicated since in the case of 5 prefetches, you'd have to pick the last 5 executed queries. Yeah, and that the last thing that you mentioned there, Alex, of how do you know which queries are associated with which evaluation of the query set? And yeah. Um, I just want to explore this a little bit. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but all right, so that's not, so it's queries log. Let's see where this gets added to. So it's append. Yeah, I don't think we're gonna figure. I'm not gonna be able to figure that out of how this would work. I think it's worth us mentioning to see what others think. But if we maybe we just assume we're gonna stick with the last query API interface, because that is an improvement. Like it's yeah, and then you can still grab the other queries if you need to. Like you can go to the connections and dot queries, and that has all your everything that's been run. Anything else that you spotted that you want to talk about? Or what did you all spot that you want to ask about?
Can I go first?
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Okay, I have some. I would like to understand better the process because I think there's multiple step to um, to give a query set. Okay, and which kind of step is the query evaluated?
It's a good question. Okay. So this part of the docs, how do I change this to light mode? There we go. So there are a couple of methods specifically that force evaluation. So there are like get or latest or earliest. Those ones are going to force it, like it's going to go fetch a single row and pull it out. So it'll immediately evaluate the query set, or it'll turn the query set into a query, run that query, return the result. With collections of data, it's when you start iterating, when you evaluate a query set, like it's as it says in the docs here, where you have a for loop going over it. That's when it first makes that first iteration. It's going to generate the query set's going to turn to a query. The query will be run against the database. We'll start pulling data out. Another way is if you pass it into a list, like here, that'll automatically evaluate the query set. There's this one where you convert a query set to a Boolean. That that can also evaluate it because it's going to call dot exists on it, which will basically say, is there, it'll do a query where it says limit one. And if there's a piece of data that, if a row does get returned, it's like, all right, there's some data for this query. So if you ever have a method, let's see, if you have a method that does like user.objects.all, or sorry, it should actually be get user query set. And you want to know, like, let's say get user query set here has the option, has the possibility of returning none, and you want to check that, like you actually have to check if query set is none. You can't do a truthy check where like if query set, because this is going to convert the query set to query set dot exists. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's what it means by evaluating query sets. I kind of forgot where we were getting onto that topic.
I think that was my question.
Okay. Um, yeah, so I took a couple of notes. What other notes do you have before I dive into mine?
Um, I put a note because I saw that the PR relies um, connection that queries that is available only in debug true.
Yeah, and that was I think they mentioned that Simon mentioned this in one of his comments as well of where was that link?
I think the
It was
last
this one.
one.
This is the one I was. So the debug cursor for queries logged. So it's not only just debug, it's if this force debug cursor gets set, which I've never seen this. So let's see if I can find it in the code. So, okay, so this must be yeah, so it's not showing up anywhere in the code except for the tests. Um, okay, so this is a test thing. Interesting. Yeah, so I think that's what you said too of Raphael. He pointed out that the documentation would need to be updated about this only being debug. I think it would also work with, I feel like the Django debug toolbar has a debug cursor that sets, I would imagine that sets it to true. Um, I could imagine somebody eventually extending the the shell to allow for that like to be set like through a setting or through a command argument, and then it kind of just goes and sets the database cursor. But I don't know how realistic that is. Yeah, so we need to note that the debug constraint should be documented. Cool. What else? Sarah says with the prefetch thought, would execute a query still make sense or base query deprecate it for a list? Yeah. We'll get back to I think we're gonna ignore that for now of what the API should be and just kind of assume we're gonna pose that question, but we're gonna assume that we're gonna stick with last query for now. Anything else, Rafaela?
No.
Okay.
What's your note?
So the ones that I was looking for, so Alex in his original description had called out some SQL compiler usages, and I remember seeing those from some other stuff that I was doing, and it was always really complicated. Um, you mentioned looking for backwards incompatibilities, so I wanted to look for that. And then there's also a comment somewhere about async not working. And so I want to check that. And then I don't remember where I saw it, but I think it might have actually been in the ticket. Excuse me. Alex had mentioned last query, or I guess in this case, it's now executed query. When that isn't set, if the query set hasn't been evaluated, should that return none, or should that raise an exception, or should it return an empty string? Um, and I just wanted to see where we landed on that. And um, yeah, I think those, and then the other note I have is the prefetch thing, which we already talked about. So yeah, looking through the code, there wasn't anything about SQL compiler. I think that must have been a mention of something before an earlier solution that he then found a better one. Um, backwards incompatibilities. I don't see any because it's just adding on to the existing functionality. So I think we're okay there. Async, I would like to, I feel like this should work with async. I'd be surprised if it didn't. And I'd want to know why it wouldn't. And then, yeah, with last query, I think this is worth a question to clarify why did we land on none rather than the exception or string. Do you have any thoughts on where is it? This piece of code right here, where it goes else none.
Do you think it's more uh, the the decision made on something that you expected, or maybe it's just an arbitrary decision?
I don't think this was an arbitrary decision. I couldn't find the, so Simon had originally suggested it.
Hmm.
And okay, oh, so here it is. So this is Alex. As for copy and pasting, okay, so Alex did consider raising an error if the query set hasn't been evaluated instead of none, but he's not a big fan of that idea. Okay. As as a developer, Raffaella, what would you expect to happen?
Yeah, if I have this last query, I expect to receive the query, but if none, maybe because there's no query, or there's no chance to retrieve the query.
That's a good, yeah, that's a good and interesting insight. Like, so there is a bit of a difference there of the query hasn't been executed yet, or is something set up where you can't get the query. Um, so I think if we look at queries log, so how does this, all right, so there's a maximum length to it. Where does this come from? Oh, okay. So this isn't, all right, so it's 9,000. There's no chance of it. You have to, okay. So I was going to say, like, if this is something that the user can configure, how many queries you can log, it's possible that they get it into a state of misconfiguration. And in that case, maybe we do want to warn the user or log something out and say like, hey, you're never going to be able to look at a query. Um, but that's not the case. So yeah, I think none is probably fine. Like does a query set ever evaluate, like, does a query set ever boil down into a query that's none, where you could get the wrong impression? I don't think so. Ooh. Sage asks, what happens if you do mymodel.objects.none? That is a really good question. I remember my keep doing this. I'm gonna have to actually put together a sample project. Yes, maybe that's what we'll do. That's interesting. Okay, so that gave me an error trying to print the query. From Django. No. How do I get the connection dot queries? Okay.
Uh,
Seems like it is. Okay. Yeah. So you dot objects dot none does not generate a query. Ooh. What if call dot none? Okay. Interesting. So I've definitely had this pattern before where I have a query set that's getting built. Maybe like on a view, like there's the default query set that you have as a member, and then there's some authorization logic that happens later. And I determine like, hey, this user shouldn't have access to this. So I'll adjust the query set to be query set equals query set dot none, um, to effectively restrict their ability to view any data. So is that when that gets returned, are we considering that to be an evaluated query set?
one question,
Mhm.
Tim, but this case that you mentioned before isn't going to happen in debug false?
No, because the no. So this dot, I don't think so. I could be wrong. I thought the connection here dot queries would be pulling from the same spot as here. But I guess I don't know for sure. It's, how do I? hmm,
Okay, Alex says that in debug false, the property will always be none because these queries are not logged.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I wasn't sure if this queries log, which is what this is built on top of, um, if that's what's being exposed in connection dot queries. But I would have to imagine it is. It doesn't make it'd be pretty weird if we had two different collections. Yeah. Hmm. I guess if we're not logging a query for .none, if it doesn't show up in connection in dot queries, what? Oof. Yeah, this is a bit of a problem because so let's say if you have I'm trying to think of how to explain this. So if we have multiple queries being occurring in the same thread, is this going to pull whatever the last one is? Or is this based on the query set? So how do we check this? Suppose we could run the test. So I want to know if we do arguably this should be none. Oh, still have to fix that. But I suspect if we run this test, I think it's going to want to evaluate um to this. It sets the executed query after the query set is evaluated, but not when it's accessed. Correct. But Alex, it's not, is it resetting? Um, is it going to reset the queries collection? Yeah, as Sage said, it might give us the, I'm wondering, yeah, as Sage is pointing out, is it going to give us the previous non-empty query instead? So now I have no idea how to run the test. Django. Sarah, in tests we have a certain number of queries. This is debug helper in the shell. Sarah, are you wondering if we should have this debug helper in the shell? Okay. Hmm. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess I would just wonder like what's the difference between that and running it with print SQL enabled? Where are we? Test queries. Okay. It's not right.
Page suggests queries dot test dot executed query test.
Thank you, Sage. Okay. Yes. So it does look like it pulled the previous one. I always forgot to change this again. I'll do that for next time.
Do you expect the test failed?
Unfortunately, yes. I didn't want it to fail. Um, it shouldn't fail, like because theoretically, if you call .none or you call something that evaluates it, it's going to have to reset executed query. Like this should pass in my opinion, but instead it's going to pull from this one. So it's using the previous evaluated query. So I think that's a bug that we need to note. Okay. Okay. So we have that. We never did get to the async stuff. Yeah. So how much longer do you want to go, Raffaella? I mean,
Mm, how many notes do you have?
so we have two specific things we have to note. We have the debug constraint should be documented, which I think Raphael has already pointed out. And then we have this
Yes.
bug with objects.none of what should this, how does using the .none query set method affect executed query? And then pointing out there could be use or utility in executed query being executed queries and showing us the full slate of queries that were executed, including the prefetches. So I think those are the main notes that I've identified in our conversation. I would recommend everyone else who's had comments in the chat, please go leave a message on the PR. I think Raphael and I are going to limit ours to those three that we talked about, but it's definitely folks can leave other comments. I'm sure Sarah Boyce doesn't need us to tell her that. She'll just, yeah. Okay. So Raphael, last time we did this, we both split the comments. Do you have one that you would prefer to leave more than the other?
The first one related with the documentation, I think it's already done. Okay. So we have just two.
Yeah.
No, okay. And
Um, so it's the objects.none and then
okay,
including the prefetch queries.
I think I'm going to the none.
Okay. All right. Then I will work on writing up a comment about prefetch queries. And like this is one of those things where I don't know like, does the prefetch queries belong in the track ticket or does it belong in the PR? Because now this is kind of like what we ran into a little bit with the our 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 test run of we ended up saying like, hey, I don't know if we agree with this API as a whole. Yeah, we'll see. I guess we'll learn as we keep going.
And because the NULL is related with the test, do you think it's mm, it's something that it could make different to make this note?
Yeah, I think yeah, I don't know where that's gonna go. Um, I can share that code though if you want to include that. Um, but yeah, this area of the code that I'm sharing right now of self.executed equals connections db last query, this is probably we're gonna have to reset self.executed query somewhere. Um, and my guess is it's gonna be dot none. Sorry, I want to see if I can. Okay, maybe it's here. So this is the none method. So we can either do it, so set empty, and what are we, so connections last, okay. So I don't know if that would work. Um, so one option is just easily do this, uh, or, so this chain method, every time we call it, that's actually probably where it should happen. Because every time if you adjust the query set, you shouldn't be copying along the executed query because you've now changed the query set in some fashion and it needs to be evaluated again. Let's, yeah. So maybe this is where it belongs. Yeah, and like this exactly, this makes a lot of sense of return a copy of the query set that's ready for another operation. At that point, yeah, we after that next operation is applied, that's when we should be clearing executed query. But I don't know enough of if this is actually right or not. But I think the idea makes sense. Anything else on that?
So I'm going to leave a message with the test we tried.
Yeah. And if you want to mention that we should, I would, I imagine we also need to test as you chain operations to a query set, is is the executed query being cleared? Or is it always, yeah, and see, like that's the confusing. Executed query does imply that every time you change it, it should be none because you need to execute the new query set um, to get the correct, the now executed query. Oh, I'm so sorry, Alex. Can't believe I suggested this and said it was an easy change. It is not. So I don't know if anyone else does this, but the Hemingway app can tell you how complex your writing is. And so sometimes I like to plug it in there and see if I'm going to be understood or not.
I remember you suggest me this the Hemingway, but at first I just wondering why why the because I think it's a writer. It was a writer.
Yeah, there's another tool for writing. Yeah. But that one's, I don't use it for grammar. It's just more of like, Tim, you're being way too wordy. Um, okay. Any concerns, Raffaella, with me posting this comment?
I think I have a really simple comment. If you want, I just post it on the chat.
Which chat?
The Discord. Do you want Discord?
I mean, it might be worth to put it in Zoom.
Okay.
I don't know how many people are monitoring everything. Just insert the test. Yeah, I think it would be, I think you should also note that this test highlights that the executed query isn't being reset. And then pose the question of, should it be reset for every chained operation?
Hmm. Um, I also brought the executed queries could be reset to being chained on the next operation. Is that correct?
I think so. I mean, we never confirmed it, but I think it's a fair assumption because it's setting executed query when the fetch happens. Yeah, yeah. No, I think you're correct. You're right in that, because if you start defining a new query set and you never actually execute the query, it should return none, but it's going to return the previous value. Yeah. So you're good.
Are we going to post it together?
Yeah. Let's do. What was it? What did we say? We screamed when we hit comment? Isn't that what we did last time?
Oh, I don't know if everyone is agree with our suggestion. If everyone agree.
It's us. They're the peanut gallery. Or that's not actually, no, that's not a right term to use anymore. I apologize. They're an audience. They don't get final say. All right.
So we are going to
3, 2, 1,
three,
2, 1.
one.
Ah! All right. I'm sure that that's exactly what everyone wants to hear. Um, cool. I think that's it. If folks have any comments and you're not a troll, we would love to hear them. Um, yeah. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Rafael. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you, Sage, because you also agree with us.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Sage.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Alex, for putting together this PR. It's really great to see movement on this issue. So, all right, everyone have a good weekend. Bye-bye.